This is the soldier with a machine gun in 1942. This is a soldier with a machine gun in 2025. Notice any difference in what they're holding in their hands. Have you ever wondered why the infamous MG42 still continues to haunt us, appearing on what is supposed to be a modern-day battlefield, and why it simply refuses to die? Well, if the answer is yes, you're about to find out the truth through the real story of the most talked-about machine gun in history. The MG42 story goes back to the MG08, a weapon that marked the beginning of a new era in warfare. The MG08 was a water-cooled version of the Maxim gun from World War I, a weapon that revolutionized the battlefield by introducing the terrifying concept of continuous automatic fire. It could hold off waves of enemy soldiers and turn open fields into death traps. But as warfare evolved, so did the needs of the soldiers and their weapons. The Germans realized that the next war would not be fought from muddy trenches like the last one. They were preparing for a faster, more mobile kind of war, the Blitzkrieg. This required weapons that could move with their troops and still deliver devastating firepower. The MG08, weighing around 80 pounds and firing 500 rounds per minute, was a monster of a machine, but it was slow, bulky, and better suited for static defense. Even though it continued to serve in secondary roles, it no longer fit the vision of a fast-moving army that could strike hard and retreat before the enemy could react. In the years between the two world wars, German engineers secretly began developing new weapons, even though they were forbidden from doing so by the Treaty of Versailles. Working under strict secrecy, they experimented with designs that could offer the same power as the MG08, but in a lighter, more efficient package. One of their early results was the MG13, a much lighter air-cooled machine gun that one soldier could carry into battle. It introduced a quick barrel change system, allowing soldiers to keep firing even as the barrel heated up. Instead of being mounted on a heavy tripod, it came with a bipod at the front, making it easier to use in fast-moving situations. These were groundbreaking improvements, and they would later shape the design of the MG42. But the MG13 had one major flaw. It was fed by a 25-round magazine instead of an ammunition belt. With a firing rate of 600 rounds per minute, that meant just 2.5 seconds of firing before needing to reload. In the chaos of battle, that simply wasn't enough. The Germans needed a machine gun that could lay down sustained suppressive fire without constant reloading. 4 years later, they introduced the MG34, a weapon that would change the course of machine gun development forever. The MG34 was the world's first general-purpose machine gun. It could serve as a light machine gun when fired from a bipod, or as a heavy machine gun when mounted on a tripod. It used an ammunition belt instead of a magazine, could fire around 900 rounds per minute, and had a quick barrel change system that allowed it to keep up a high rate of fire without overheating. Made with precision engineering and high-quality materials, the MG34 was the pride of German industry. It was used everywhere, mounted on tanks, aircraft, vehicles, and of course in the hands of infantrymen. It even had special spiderweb sights for anti-aircraft use. Soldiers could fire it from the hip, from the ground, or even from an assistant's shoulder. One of its most innovative features was the Lafette mount, which stabilized the gun and allowed for accurate long bursts. This mount alone was a mechanical marvel that gave German gunners incredible accuracy. However, the MG34 had its flaws. It was extremely complex and expensive to make. Each weapon took about 150 man-hours to produce and cost roughly 320 Reichsmarks, equivalent to about $3,000 today. It was also very sensitive to dust, dirt, and freezing temperatures, meaning soldiers had to constantly clean and oil it to keep it working. These were not major issues for a small elite force, but as the war spread across multiple continents, the demand for machine guns skyrocketed. Germany needed a weapon that could be mass-produced quickly, cheaply, and still perform as well as the MG34. German engineers faced an almost impossible task: create a machine gun that was cheaper, faster to build, and even more effective. They turned to stamped steel instead of machined parts, which dramatically reduced production time and costs. The result was the MG42. It was faster to build, more reliable in harsh conditions, and had an even higher rate of fire, up to 200 rounds per minute, earning it the nickname Hitler's buzzsaw. Its terrifying sound became a psychological weapon on its own, striking fear into Allied soldiers, who described it as the sound of ripping cloth. The MG42 could fire so fast that individual shots blended into one continuous roar. It had an improved quick-change barrel system that allowed gunners to swap barrels in seconds, preventing overheating during long firefights. On top of that, it was easier to maintain, more resistant to dirt, and half as expensive as the MG34. Each MG42 took about 75 man-hours to produce and cost around 240 Reichsmarks, saving valuable time and resources as the war dragged on. The MG42 entered mass production and quickly became one of the most feared weapons on the battlefield. Over 400,000 units were produced during the war. It became the backbone of German infantry squads, often operated by a team of 2 or 3 soldiers, a gunner, an assistant, and an ammo carrier. Together, they could unleash a wall of lead that pinned down entire enemy units. The Allies learned to fear the distinct sound of its rapid fire echoing through the battlefield. Yet despite its success, the MG42 never completely replaced the MG34. One reason was practical: halting MG34 production. To retool factories for the MG42 would have slowed down Germany's already strained war production. The other reason was technical. The MG34 fit better as a coaxial or hull-mounted machine gun in tanks, whereas the MG42's barrel change system made it unsuitable for that role. Even after World War II, the MG42 refused to disappear. Its design was so advanced and effective that it became the foundation for many post-war machine guns, including the MG3 used by modern German forces today. Variants of the MG42 have appeared in conflicts all over the world, from Korea and Vietnam to Afghanistan. Its influence shaped the very idea of what a modern machine gun should be: reliable, mobile, and devastatingly fast. More than 8 decades after its creation, the MG42 remains a symbol of engineering genius and a reminder of how far ahead of its time German weapon design truly was. Its sound, once feared by soldiers across Europe, still echoes in the modern battlefield through its descendants, proving that the MG42 never really died. It simply evolved. If you wanted to change the barrel on the MG34, you had to unlatch the barrel housing, twist it, and pull the hot barrel out from behind. Then insert the fresh one and lock it back to continue firing. The MG42 had a simpler and faster system where you'd unlatch the barrel from the side, extract it in one smooth motion, push in the fresh barrel, and slam it locked. But you couldn't do this inside the tight turret of a tank without redesigning it completely. So when you saw the MG42 on a tank, it was always mounted from the outside, like in front of the commander's cupola, for additional anti-infantry or anti-aircraft protection. The Germans kept parallel production of both machine guns throughout the war, and they needed spare parts for thousands of already produced MG34s. Now, they had the machine gun that fired more than double the rounds per minute of any Allied weapon. So yes, we could now mention those extremely chewed-over facts and myths where it fired so fast that you couldn't hear between rounds. Just one continuous sound that terrified Allied soldiers, that it could cut a man in half, that it was called Hitler's buzzsaw, yada yada yada. And don't get me wrong, most of these things are actually true. It's just that I'm more impressed by the ingenious and mostly overlooked engineering behind and around this gun that made all those nicknames and myths actually true. This gun wouldn't still be in service in slightly modified versions today if it wasn't so good. Now imagine how dominant it was in 1942, when there wasn't any competition in the world. When it appeared on the battlefield for the first time in 1942, it was immediately noticed by Allied troops who quickly learned to fear it, and for good reason. The MG42 fired from the open bolt for better cooling and to prevent the gun from locking up or cooking off rounds in the chamber after prolonged firing. It used short recoil operation with a roller-locked bolt. This basically means the barrel and bolt move back together after firing under recoil. 2 roller bearings stop the barrel after it travels a few millimeters back until the bolt goes all the way back, extracts the spent casing, loads the next round from the belt into the chamber, and fires upon locking. This process repeats at extremely high speed for as long as the trigger is pressed. The standard German cartridge was the powerful 8x57mm Mauser, the same round used by the Kar 98K rifle. Although machine guns sometimes used a slightly different tracer pattern, usually every 5th round in the belt, so the gunner could observe the impacts and correct his aim. Belts were non-disintegrating, made of linked steel strips in 50-round lengths, often joined into 250-round strips for the ammo box or longer for tanks or fixed positions. Germans also used drums attached to their machine guns that held a 50-round belt, keeping it clean and ready as ammo. So crews didn't have to drape belts around their necks or trip over them like some Allied teams did. Also, look at the German ammo cans. They had neat folding handles with leather grips for comfortable carrying, and they were positioned so you could carry 2 cans in one hand or fold them to stack boxes where space was tight, like in tanks or bunkers. They were watertight, could be latched to belts or attached to the Lafette tripod. Again, the Allies had nothing comparable. It's fascinating how far the Germans went in making every small part work together. The pinnacle of that was definitely the Lafette tripod, which we have to explain before we continue with what happened to the MG42 after the war. Both the machine guns and their mounts didn't end with the conflict they were designed for. The Lafette 42 was a specialized mount, weighing about 45 lb. Allies had heavy tripods too, but this one was different. It turned a light machine gun into an accurate, heavy support weapon. The Lafette had tubular steel legs, holding the central body and gun. 2 coiled buffer springs absorbed recoil to make it stable and more accurate, and a separate trigger meant the gunner didn't have to wrestle with vibration while firing. It had fine aiming controls and advanced optics that increased the effective range up to $3,000 m, making it useful even for indirect fire, almost like light artillery. But what's truly ingenious was its mechanical fire control device called the Tiefenfeuer Automat. It worked like a clock mechanism. The gunner set 2 range limits and the sweep zone he wanted. Essentially, he selected the area where he wanted the machine gun to lay down fire, a road the enemy might use, a bridge to deny, or any zone to cover, and the mechanism would automatically sweep and fire across that sector. The result was a web of pre-planned, timed fire that could deny ground or break up enemy movement without the gunner having to aim at each target individually. In practice, a Lafette-mounted MG could cover approaches with frightening efficiency, especially at night or in low-visibility conditions when enemy columns relied on predictable routes. Beyond the tripod and feeding systems, the Germans thought through logistics and ergonomics in small details. Spare barrels, cleaning kits, and maintenance routines were standardized, so crews could train quickly. Training emphasized teamwork. The gunner, assistant, and ammo carrier practiced rapid barrel swaps, immediate action drills, and coordinated fields of fire. Ammunition supply was organized with linked belts, cans, and drums, so a section could keep firing longer and more reliably than many Allied teams that carried loose belts or box magazines. The psychological effect of this planning cannot be overstated. The noise, the sustained wall of lead, and the sight of tracer belts snapping through the air all combined to shape enemy behavior. After the war, the MG42's influence spread. Countries captured or inherited the design and copied or adapted it, because the basic idea was simply brilliant. A robust, high rate of fire, easily produced weapon that could be mounted in many roles. Post-war designs borrowed the roller-locking short recoil system, the quick-change barrel concepts, and the focus on stamped parts for rapid manufacture. Even where exact copies were not made, engineers studied the MG42's solutions to overheating, feeding, and crew ergonomics. This is why descendants of the MG42 or weapons inspired by it turned up in post-war armies and conflicts around the globe. Its legacy also taught militaries to think of machine guns as squad-level force multipliers rather than just static defensive tools. Maintenance and doctrine evolved. Gunners were trained to think in fields of fire and rates of sustained barrage rather than single-aimed shots. Finally, the MG42 story shows how design, production, and logistics combine with tactics to create a weapon greater than the sum of its parts. The fast barrel change, the belt feeding, the ammo handling, the mount, and the crew drills all work together to make a gun that not only produced terrifying noise, but also practical, repeatable battlefield dominance. That's why the MG42 didn't just become a fearsome tool for one war. It became a template for what modern machine guns could and should be. Using this mechanism, when the trigger was pulled, the gun would fire and automatically sweep itself across this preset field. And because that sweep was mechanical and predictable, it could be set to cover a lane, a crossroads, or a choke point without the gunner having to actively aim for each individual target, meaning one well-placed Lafette, and a few careful settings could deny entire approaches for hours on end. Any time the trigger was pressed, the gun would fire across this zone, and the gunner didn't even have to be near the gun. He could tie a string to the trigger and stay in cover while the gun fired across the designated zone, as long as it had ammo, which made the Lafette-mounted MG a kind of remote, semi-autonomous sentry that multiplied manpower by allowing one crew to control several fields of fire or move between positions while covering fire continued. The Lafette tripod worked the same with MG34 and MG42, and it's one of the most overlooked features of German weaponry, significantly boosting the effectiveness of their machine guns and turning them into full-auto snipers capable of long-range, aimed suppressive fire rather than mere area saturation. It was also easier to swap barrels when the gun was in the mount, and a well-trained crew could literally do it in 3 to 4 seconds and continue laying fire, which meant sustained barrages that would normally require several spare barrels, and frantic crew work could be handled calmly and repeatedly by a practiced team. In defensive positions, MG42s were a nightmare for advancing Allied troops, and not just because of the rate of fire. The combination of speed, effective range, and mechanical stabilization made them lethal in ways simple reputation alone cannot explain. With the Lafette mount, as you saw, they sat much lower to the ground and were therefore harder to spot and destroy, their silhouette minimized, while the tripod's stability allowed for longer, more accurate bursts that could reach beyond the effective range of many small arms. Germans were masters of deception to make it seem like they had more machine guns than they actually did. They prepared multiple firing positions for each team and, after firing for some time, would move and switch position, then continue firing from a new angle. This fluid battlefield choreography frustrated Allied commanders, who received fire from all directions and believed a much larger force opposed them, and it left them unsure where to direct artillery or tanks to silence the guns without exposing themselves to ambush. When Germans had to retreat, they often did so only after inflicting catastrophic losses, and then withdrawing to a new position to repeat the tactic. This hit-and-run defense made each Allied advance expensive and slow, a tactic that proved especially effective in the late war withdrawals toward the Reich, where terrain, fortifications, and prepared fields of fire multiplied the MG team's lethality. Germans also used coordinated two-gun tactics. One gun would fire tracers high above Allied positions to create the false impression that firing was aimed at rear or support units, so the front units would attempt to advance or reposition. The second gun would wait for that exact moment and cut them down as they exposed themselves, a psychological and technical trap that relied on timing, controlled fire, and accurate understanding of enemy reaction. For the German gunner, firing 20 rounds per second required discipline with the trigger for several practical reasons. You could damage the gun by firing too long, either overheating the barrel to the point of warping or causing catastrophic failure in the feed system that could blow the gun up in your face. Incidents that, while not everyday occurrences, were known to happen and kept crews respectful of cyclic limits. This extreme rate of fire was a double-edged sword. Ammo was consumed far faster, and someone had to carry enough to feed the hungry gun, which forced German logistics to adapt with specialized belts, cans, and transportation solutions. To maximize the potential of their machine guns, Germany organized squads around the weapon itself. Unlike Allied doctrine that often treated machine guns as supporting arms categorized into light, medium, and heavy, the Germans built a modular approach around a single general-purpose weapon and trained squads to operate as a unit. A standard infantry squad had 10 soldiers. At its core was the machine gun team composed of the gunner, assistant, and ammo bearer. These three worked together, carrying all the equipment, ensuring the gun ran smoothly and helping each other with adjusting fire, reloads, barrel swaps, and repositioning. If the gunner was hit, the assistant took over immediately and kept firing. Redundancy and cross-training were built into the team, so nothing stopped the weapon from doing its job. These three typically carried a 9mm pistol as a sidearm for close defense. The rest of the squad, 6 soldiers armed with Kar 98K bolt-action rifles, protected the machine gun team or advanced under its covering fire to secure ground, while the 10th man, usually a non-commissioned officer armed with an MP40, directed the squad and coordinated with higher units. They often used horses or donkeys to pull carts loaded with ammunition because they burned through thousands of rounds that were difficult to carry by hand. One 250-round box weighed about 8 kilos, roughly 20 lb, and could be gone in about 10 seconds of continuous firing. So careful planning of resupply fallback positions and firing schedules was essential to maintain combat effectiveness. You might wonder, if the MG42 was so good, why didn't the Allies widely adopt captured examples or immediately copy it? They did use captured guns when they could, especially by partisans and resistance groups who prized the weapon's firepower. But using an enemy weapon brought significant challenges. Troops weren't trained on the German systems. Maintenance routines, spare parts, and a steady ammunition supply were absent. And when something broke, there was no reliable replacement or technical manual to consult. As for copying the design, the United States tried to reverse engineer captured MG42s in the T-24 project, producing 2 prototypes rechambered for the US 30 AS-06 cartridge. But they couldn't solve several technical issues to make them work reliably or match the original cyclic rate. The project consumed resources better spent on designs already in mass production and was eventually abandoned. That said, Allied engineers did take inspiration. Elements of the MG42's stamped steel manufacturing, quick-change barrels and ergonomics were studied and, combined with features from weapons like the German FG42 paratrooper rifle, influenced later designs such as the M60. After the war, many MG42s remained in vast stockpiles and were scavenged by numerous countries. Some states produced direct copies, like the Yugoslav M53, which stayed in service for decades, and many nations incorporated MG42-derived concepts into domestic designs. When West Germany rearmed within NATO, it needed a modern general-purpose machine gun, and rather than discard its legacy, repurposed MG42s in the 7.62 51 NATO caliber and designated them MG1, essentially the same gun with a new barrel and minor modifications for the different round. Subsequent tweaks added a heavier bolt to slow the cyclic rate to a more controllable and economical, roughly 900 rounds per minute, and the evolution continued into the MG3, which accepted disintegrating NATO belts and other post-war logistics improvements while keeping the core principles intact. The Lafette-style mount was retained and updated with modern optics and fire control, turning the MG3 into a long-range, vehicle and emplacement mounted weapon, now used with night vision and remote controls on modern turrets. Beyond hardware, the MG42 story reshaped doctrine. Machine guns became squad-level force multipliers rather than static defensive tools, and militaries worldwide rethought training, emphasizing fields of fire, coordinated rates of sustained barrage, and the integration of logistics and tactics to keep the guns supplied and effective. The combination of a high cyclic rate, quick barrel changes, efficient feeding systems, purpose-built ammo containers, thoughtful crew drills, and mounts like the Lafette created a system where each element amplified the others, producing battlefield dominance that was practical and repeatable rather than merely anecdotal. That systemic thinking is why the MG42's influence persisted long after. 45. It taught weapons designers and tacticians that superior performance comes not from one feature alone but from how parts, people, and processes fit together to produce a reliable, maintainable, and devastatingly effective whole.